Whispers of the night. The air was thick with the scent of impending rain, a heavy cloak that clung to the skin and suffocated the senses. The moon, shrouded in clouds, cast a pallid light over the quiet streets. It was the perfect night for what I had planned. I moved with purpose, my footsteps barely a whisper on the damp pavement. The city was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, each alley a potential escape route, each corner a place to hide. I knew them all intimately, like a lover's touch. Tonight, they would serve me well. Her name was Clara, a pretty name for a pretty girl, too pretty for her own good. She worked at the little cafe on 5th Street, always smiling, always polite. I had watched her for weeks, learning her routines, her habits. She was predictable, like clockwork, and that made her the perfect target. I waited in the alley behind the cafe, the cool metal of the knife reassuring in my hand. She would come out soon, locking up for the night, thinking of nothing more than getting home to her cozy apartment. She would be thinking of her cat, Mr. Whiskers, and the book she was reading. She would never see me coming. The door creaked open, and there she was, silhouetted against the light. She paused, looking around, a hint of unease in her posture. She sensed something, but not enough. Not yet. She turned, locking the door, and then she was walking towards me, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. I stepped out of the shadows, my movement smooth and deliberate. She gasped, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. I saw the realization dawn in them, the knowledge that she was trapped. I savored that moment, the sweet taste of her terror. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't have any money. I smiled, a cold, cruel smile. It's not about the money, Clara. Her eyes widened further, if that was possible, and she took a step back, her back pressing against the cold brick wall. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I stepped closer, raising the knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. I want you to remember this moment, I said softly. I want you to remember me. She screamed then, a high, piercing sound that shattered the silence. I lunged, the knife slashing through the air, and her scream turned to a gurgle as it found its mark. Blood sprayed, warm and sticky, and she crumpled to the ground, her eyes wide and staring. I stood over her, watching as the life drained from her body. It was beautiful in its own way, a symphony of red and black, a dance of death. I felt a surge of satisfaction, a thrill that coursed through my veins like electricity. But there was no time to linger. I wiped the knife clean, tucking it back into my jacket, and slipped away into the night. The rain began to fall, washing away the evidence of my crime, and I disappeared into the shadows. The next morning, the city would wake to the news of Clara's murder. They would mourn her, speculate about the monster who had taken her life. They would look over their shoulders, fearful and suspicious, but they would never suspect me. I was invisible, a ghost in the night. I watched the news coverage with a detached interest, sipping my coffee as the reporter spoke of the brutal murder. They showed her picture, a smiling face that seemed so full of life. It was a stark contrast to the lifeless eyes I had looked into the night before. There was talk of a serial killer, of a pattern that was emerging. They didn't know the half of it. This was just the beginning. I had tasted the thrill of the kill, and I craved more. I would be careful, meticulous, but I would not stop. Days turned into weeks, and the city was on edge. There were police everywhere. Patrols increased, curfews enforced, but none of it mattered. I was patient, waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity. Her name was Emily. She worked at the library, a quiet, unassuming girl with a love for books and a gentle smile. I watched her, learning her routines, just as I had with Clara. She was predictable, and that made her the perfect target. It was a Friday evening when I made my move. The library was closing, and she was the last to leave, locking up the doors and stepping into the cool night air. I followed her, keeping to the shadows, my heart pounding with anticipation. She walked quickly, her steps hurried, as if sensing the danger that lurked nearby. I quickened my pace, closing the distance between us, and then I was upon her, the knife in my hand once more. She didn't scream. She didn't have time. The knife sliced through the air, finding its mark, and she crumpled to the ground, her lifeblood pooling around her. I watched, detached, as the light faded from her eyes, and then I was gone, disappearing into the night. The city was in a frenzy the next morning. 2 murders. Both young women. Both brutally killed. They spoke of a monster. A shadow that stalked the night. They were right. In a way. But they would never find me. I was too careful. Too meticulous. Weeks turned into months. And the killings continued. Each one a masterpiece. A work of art. I felt a sense of pride. A thrill that never waned. I was invincible. Untouchable. But then, something changed. A new detective came to the city. A woman named Sarah. She was smart. Relentless. And she was getting close. Too close. I watched her. Studying her. And I realized that she was a threat. She had to be dealt with. It was a cold, rainy night when I made my move. She was working late, poring over case files in her office. I slipped in through the window, moving silently, my knife ready. She didn't hear me, didn't see me until it was too late. I lunged, the knife aimed at her heart, but she was quick, too quick. She dodged, grabbing a gun from her desk, and suddenly the tables were turned. I felt a sharp pain in my side, and then another, and I stumbled, falling to the ground. She stood over me, her eyes cold and hard. "It's over," she said, her voice steady. I laughed. A harsh, grating sound. "It's never over," I whispered. "There will always be another." She didn't reply, just watched as the life drained from my body. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing that I had left my mark on the world. I had been a whisper in the night, a shadow in the darkness, and I would never be forgotten. In the end, we are all shadows, fading into the night, but some shadows are darker, more enduring, and their whispers linger long after they are gone.